Okay, if there is such a thing as big, then of course it's only logical that there's also something as small. And people in the audience with a classical education will know that the philosopher Aristotle claimed that the wise man will not try to seek wisdom on the extremes, but instead will look for a carefully calibrated spot somewhere in between these extremes. But these very balanced and well-calibrated statements generally do not make very good presentations. They're too boring. So, in order to get my message across to this great academic community, I will address you in exaggerated terms, so in hyperbole. So let me begin with asking you. I think Ulla already asked you, who's a designer in this room? And there were quite a lot, but who considers himself a big designer? I can see only two. Maybe the line is blinding a couple of them. So that's only two of them. So in exaggerated terms, the rest of them will be labeled small designers then, of course. And that's not enough. We need more big designers in this world. So the aim of this presentation is that by the end of these 30 minutes, all of you will be converted into big designers, and we will march out of here holding hands and singing a song, binding us together as though we were one anatomy, and change the fate of the poor, expiring humanity. For humanity, that's the thing that's at stake here. At least that's what they're telling us last week at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And while I agree that we may be facing great peril, as World Economic founder Klaus Schwab postulated last week in his closing speech, you heard him saying, "There has never been a time of greater promise or greater peril." And to me that doesn't sound very convincing. He looks like a mumbling priest who's reminding his devotees that they're all heading for hell. So Klaus is not going to make any inspiration to anybody in his elite audience. And he's also wrong, I think. He's telling us that we are currently heading for the fourth industrial revolution. And the first one being the invention of the steam engine. But industry is not what's causing any revolution. It's technology. Technology is revolutionary by its nature and will be so continuously and at accelerating speed. And we had several examples being shown to you in the previous speeches. So if he's serious, Klaus Schwab, and he wants to avoid a cyber-physical ozoic eon, Klaus Schwab would better have me in Davos to address the big shot audience. And this is what I will tell them. The first technological revolution manifested itself 8.1 million years ago when this man in Tanzania picked up this stone and changed it into a tool. And at that point, human evolution encountered an inflection point. It took a turn, and it was technology that altered that direction. This noble hunter, by turning the stone into a tool, he stepped outside of the animal within himself. He said goodbye to the chips, and he deviated from his bestial origins, and now he could challenge lions and elephants. And in doing that, he became so efficient in killing this prey that most of his fellow homini were no longer needed to hunt for food. And undoubtedly, the World Economic Forum would have criticized tool making because of its disruptive nature. One single invention pushing a vast proportion of the working force towards unemployment. But maybe he would not have noticed, because this disruption did not happen overnight in those days. Things that take 2 years now took thousands of years back then. But still, in the process of a couple of thousand years, most of the pre-hominy were out of a hunting job. Was that a problem? So did that mean that all of these hunter-gatherers were jobless and suddenly started hanging around caves with nothing to do and around fireplace wasting time? I don't think so. These jobless hunters simply reinvented themselves. They found out what it meant to be more than an animal. And they invented farming and the plow, and domesticating animals, and producing more food in greater varieties than any of these hunters ever dreamt of before them. So, if we take a million-year leap towards another revolutionary inflection point, in 3200 before Christ, someone in Mesopotamia is encountering problems with with his job in administration. And he's keeping records of haystacks that are in stock. And the amount of seeds that he will need to buy, and the wages that he is supposed to be paying to the workers. The brain of this unknown Mesopotamian is challenged to a degree that suddenly he invents the art of writing. And by doing that, he is enabled to record and present transactions in a permanent form. And by inventing the art of writing, once again in one blow, human capabilities that were essential in the Mesopotamian rat race were suddenly obsolete. And this time it was human memory that fell victim to technology. And of course, there was very bad news for all these itinerant performers, these moving from town to town, and who memorized stuff so they could recite the entire Odyssey to an audience who would appreciate the great oral tradition. And suddenly these people faced competition from people who could read a text. And this time we don't even need to twist our brains and imagine Klaus Schwab being time machine to Athens to lament the perils of technological advancement. None other than Socrates denounced the invention of writing. Now we must say, he walked his talk. He never wrote anything down himself. So we're lucky that his student Phaedrus documented Socrates' thoughts on the art of writing in one of his texts. I'm sorry, it's Plato, of course, in his Phaedrus text. And if you read this, we can ask ourselves in hindsight, was Socrates right? Did the art of writing create tiresome hordes roaming the streets of Athens with no knowledge and no sensible work at hand? Is that true? Is that what happened? That's what he predicts. And science would never agree with you, of course, because you cannot imagine any form of science without the art of writing. And apparently what happened again is that man reinvented himself once again, and without the need to memorize everything and occupy the brain, they came up more prolific than ever before. They started to exchange information, they started to maintain financial accounts, they codified laws, and they could record history. And if we take another leap, 2,000 years this time, we were speeding up, things happened faster. And the invention of the steam engine. This is the point where Klaus Schwab thinks the trouble began. But at that point, man was already stripped of his origins, he was stripped from his memory, and this time technology was about to phase out the muscles. And after the steam engines, machines were clearly much, much better, and they could do anything man could do. And they were stronger and more precise. And they never went on strike. And they never went to form trade unions. So of course, a lot of critics lined up, Ludis, Marx, Gideon, all denouncing the machine because once again technology debased mankind, robbing in of something essential, using their muscles and dexterity. But mankind shrugged, and instead of laboring themselves to death in a mine, they reinvented themselves once again. And what did they do? They became consumers, and mankind entered the affluent society. And after all, somebody had to consume all that stuff that machines were going to be produced. So man devoted his time, as Victor Papanek wrote 2 centuries later, persuading people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have in order to impress people who don't care. And if we speed up once again, a couple of 100 years just this time, we see one of them inventing the computer. And after fooling around with spreadsheets and word processors for a couple of decades, suddenly we were connected. An army of commentators produced an avalanche of criticism, this time complaining that mankind was no longer unique, but merely a node in a network. So now mankind would surely shrink into oblivion. But all these nodes, they shrugged and went on to learn code, and wrote apps, and invented games and gadgets, and began startups. And in a decade, their combined economic efforts dwarfed the old economy, ranking them among the world's biggest companies. And now, some days later, at this precise moment, we are witnessing the latest inflection, quantification. And some people, they claim it's a big problem too. More people start to communicate, compute, and be connected anywhere at any time. And as more and more social dimensions are added to these connected technologies, users will generate a lot of data, and they will share that data, and it will be interrelated and analyzed. And all sorts of organizations will jump on this data pile and use that to read us, to understand us, and to assess us. This will be done for commercial, for scientific, for governmental, and for security reasons, and also for no reason at all, but just because it's possible. So after robbing us of our origins and of our memory and our muscular powers and our uniqueness, we may as well soon lose the key to our own minds, our thoughts. And with that, we will cease to be human and will be reduced to objects waiting to be nudged and exploited. And this is why it is important that we should appreciate Davos for putting this stuff on the agenda. And it's also why it is very important that all of you choose to become big designers. For the big design job that awaits you is redesigning humanity itself. At this point, how many big designers do we have at this point? It's two more. Okay, we get it. You're not convinced. Okay, let me demonstrate how to become a big designer in 3 simple steps. Okay, here we go. Let's skip the tool maker and also the Mesopotamian writing inventor, because we weren't there when it happened. We were there, at least I was, in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think the Institute was, and maybe one of you were here, but we were educated to become designers to produce stuff, matter. And not just stuff, but stuff for mass production and mass markets. And in those days, the buzzword was innovation. Nobody knew what it was, but it sounded cool. Not as good as paradigm shift or disruption, but it satisfied most of us. So we were on a mission, and our methods involved redesigning existing products. Let's say next year's VW Golf. How did we learn to do it? How did we learn to answer the design question? And we did that by analyzing the existing situation's strong as well as weak points. And we listed threats and opportunities. And we analyzed the market. We went on to interview target groups and focus groups. And we went on customer journeys, and then added with lots of knowledge about new manufacturers, materials, and production techniques. Then we designed the new, improved version. That's it. And we have to admit in hindsight that most of our innovations were at best incremental. No need to be a big designer for that. And to be honest, we didn't even design VW Golfs. The most impressive breakthroughs that my professors innovated were for Luxaflex. And not even the blinds, but only the grip of the cord. And another of my professors boasted that he invented the push-button toilet flusher. Yeah, those were the days. Redesigning products on the basis of existing malfunctioning products. I think the only product that I can imagine that was coming out of nothing was the Post-it note. So this was the big innovation that we're all talking about. Competition was our main source of work, especially competition aiming at price reduction, which meant smarter production and bigger series. And those days were symbolized by the mold, an expensive tool requiring hundreds and hundreds of runs of the same product before something became economically feasible. And often the product would not even be very much better. If you would buy a Honda instead of a Triumph, it would be oil tight. Okay. An Asahi Pentax camera instead of an Exacta would have a returning mirror. Not bad, but they were half as much in price. That was the real improvement. And the Japanese successes can be entirely attributed to mold thinking as opposed to the British tooling thinking. And this mold world still exists and prevails. Most industries think it is still real. But if you know a product that still works with no dark clouds on the horizon, it's probably a commodity product, like sugar or milk, but not a complex industrial product. So let's say it aloud. This world no longer needs designers. The alert designer will want to move onwards to post-Fordist production methods and become a bigger designer. And we have all been reading these articles about 3D printing and how consumers pretty soon will design and produce stuff themselves and don't need designers at all. But the bigger designer knows that that is a fantasy. Actually, design is a pretty complicated job. And to print an iPhone jacket may be very easy, but let's say an advanced running shoe, that is high-class engineering and will not be 3D printed in every house. So the true future of 3D printing is not with private people, but with industrial production. And over there it's called additive manufacturing. And tomorrow, with the aid of digital production methods, we can really produce masses of unique products aimed at niches. Early mass customers have introduced a new buzzword, disruption. I think it's been used before, and we all know what disruption is. Disruption happens when classic players, the legacy players, face steep demand decline due to digital competitors that come up with offerings at a better price, right? But that's actually a very Fordist analysis, and I think it's wrong. If you study disruptions, you will find two different mechanisms underlying disruptions. And one of them has already been touched upon today. The first disruption starts in the long tail. This is where the hits are sold, and this is all the rest. Airbnb did not start in this area, but somewhere in the tail. They never challenged Hilton and Sheraton by outpricing them right away in 2007 when they started, but instead they offered air mattresses in cheesy private rooms for people that look for lodging in crowded areas, for instance for a conference or a concert. And if anything, Airbnb competed with the YMCA or very cheesy hotels, and not with Hilton. The Hilton had no intention of addressing these travelers because there was not enough money to be made, not enough lodgings to be sold. Thus the Airbnb offerings were all somewhere in the long tail. And Hilton looked down and considered an air mattress a lousy alternative to their beautiful standardized rooms, their molded rooms. The Hilton had a mold for hotel rooms. All the rooms were the same. In Managua, Acapulco, Dubai, a Hilton room was a Hilton room. And that became a problem because Airbnb catered for these niche markets year after year, and in the process got better and better, and ended up with a service that at some point was a threat to Hilton. Cheaper, but at that point also better, because now you knew how your room would look like. If you would look out of the window, this would be your view. You never had this with the Hilton. You get room 206. You may be facing a brick wall. And if you complain with Airbnb, you get a response. With the Hilton, you go to the front desk and that's it. So what Airbnb actually did in that process, that took them a couple of years, is getting more and more intimate with the customer. You want a deserted church? We'll find you a deserted church. You want a gas station? We have a gas station. You want the cheapest room? We have a cheapest room. All that is possible. And the more they know about you as a customer, the more they are able to offer custom offerings. With every improvement of the service, they're moving away from mold thinking. And in the end, they're genuinely able to meet niche questions. So that's the way disruption works. It's not wham, there's a disruptor. It takes years. Uber, same thing. People have been laughing for years about Uber, the taxi companies. The second recipe for disruptions works with unfair competition. And in the past, states were blamed for this because of subsidizing or fiscalizing certain products. But these days it's the other way around. The disrupted corporations beg the states to do something about it, and it's called asymmetric competition. So the British motorcycle industry was wiped away by the Japanese, but that was also a motorcycle industry. They had the same economic laws. Both of them made plastic and metal into a motorcycle and tried to sell it. And the Japanese won because they were mold thinkers, and the British lost because they were not mold thinkers. But with asymmetric business models are nomadic. So that means that they cross borders of markets. And in doing so, also the profits cross these borders. So Vodafone is competing with T-Mobile, and they price each other to death, but their real competitor is, of course, WeChat or Viber or Line or WhatsApp, because that costs nothing. These will be the showstoppers. And the problem is that these companies don't make their revenues by selling calls and data bundles. They make their revenues somewhere else. So what asymmetric competitors really do is find out how their customers define the market. And for Apple, for instance, an iPhone, an app, and iTunes all belong for the customer to the same market. And they are devotees because they value the user experience and the truly integrated offering Apple comes up with. Nexus users, they value a more broad variety of options and more models and cheaper technology and better technology very often. And they're fine with third parties exploiting the data profiles these Android phones generate. But both of them leverage demand in one market by generating consumption in another market. And the disruptive trick is that only in one of these markets they charge marginal costs, thus subsidizing themselves. So the disrupted competition, the Vodafones, are still trapped in mold thinking again. They don't see that the market they're in, transmitting calls through networks, actually is a construct they came up with themselves. And they claim it's unfair to sell Wi-Fi calls at zero margin cost. And this will become a reality as soon as Google decides to shoot this Wi-Fi balloon system into the world. This is one of their plans, to have Africa ballooned. I don't know what the antennas are going to do in that time. No, it sounds very easy, but it is not, because if it was, everybody would be doing that. The truth is that the strategy should be innovative, highly accessible, and not easy to replicate. So in other words, it needs bigger design to be able to provide transformational, strategically sound, innovative, and smart proposals to organizations setting up the next step. So the bigger designer will agree that there are almost no markets that eventually will not be facing asymmetric or niche disruption, or maybe even both. A bigger designer consulting for clients will no longer consider incrementally innovating at the existing product level, even if the client asks for it. They will focus on the real threat, and they will start each assignment with no preconceived ideas whatsoever. They will do anthropologist work or sociologist work more than engineering. So, what's happening? The bigger designer needs to, in this post-forwarded area, an analysis that is much richer than just this technological analysis. They will also need questions on an interaction level and also on a contextual level. And if we have analysis on this contextual level, then we have an idea on how the context will change over the years or over time. We may be capable of modeling a future context that will aid us to understand how aspects of that future will interrelate with each other. And this understanding will help us decide on what we should want our mission. And then we are able to reframe the original design question, which used to be over here, over there. This is the position where you have to pose your design question in the redesigned context. And this understanding will help us to decide what we should accomplish, which is our mission. Okay, and if this is a prolific context, it will direct us in deciding which interactions we need and to realize the behavior we desire in order to answer our reframed design question. And it's a vital thing for the bigger designer, because the interactions will have to do with how people will behave. And then, only then, once we know about all that, we can come up with a new intervention. A new intervention that is going to do what we want to accomplish in our mission. And we speak of interventions, not just of products. It can only be a service or a strategy or a policy or a law or a governmental system. You can design anything once you have decided what sort of interaction you want and what sort of behavior. And all of that, of course, is the reframing U-turn. We never go directly from existing to new, but we take a U-turn via the old interaction, via the old context, towards the new context, the new interaction, and then to the new intervention. And that, of course, is the brainchild of Matthijs van Dijk, one of your teachers here. He's my partner. Together with Hackert, he wrote this pink book, The Bigger Design Bible. So pay attention next time he shows up here for his lessons. Step 3. Now that we're facing quantification, disruptions will invade every nook of the world. Insurance, banking, we already heard a lot of examples that will change. And entire professions will be wiped out. It's true. There will be casualties as people are washed away by all of that. Here we are. So, I'm speeding up here because I'm looking at the clock.
5 more minutes.
Huh?
Hey, okay, 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, that's not enough. Okay, the big designer understands that technology has always been very, very much self-propelling, and there's no way to stop it. So the point of prophets of doom, like Klaus Schwab, that we should take seriously is that the process of admiration and submission, we could easily sacrifice something, and which is the trade-in of human values in favor of technological values. This is a serious thing we have to tackle, because technology is not neutral. It changes our behavior, our social relations, and our norms. And it does so without waiting for our full consent or our understanding of the risks involved. So this is where you step in, and this is why we have to ask ourselves, what do we want technology to bring us? And a big designer will provide a vision on the relation of humans to this new technology. And I'm suggesting 3 big design issues here, each of them making a very interesting master thesis or a PhD dissertation. And the first one is morality. That's at stake. Technology will be granted authority on choices between life and death. You've probably seen this picture. The self-driving car is going to be equipped with accident avoidance algorithms that decide what to do in case a school class suddenly jumps up in front of your car. Will it be the kids? They caused the problem. Or is it you who own the car? Or is it the bystander who has nothing to do with it? You choose. No, you don't. Your car will choose. And who is going to decide that? The law, the car maker, or maybe a user preference? We have to think about it. To be killed by technology has always been a potential end to your life, ever since that man picked up that stone. But to be sacrificed or executed by a machine without a human interfering, that's a new thing, and it never happened before. And we cannot leave it up to technology to decide about that. So we will need to find out and express ways how our morals and beliefs can be forced upon technology. And I think it will be a very fruitful exercise, because most probably it will show us how little we agree on ethical dilemmas ourselves, and how unpredictable we are ourselves. What would you do in that car? I don't think each and everyone would take the right decision, and we would certainly not take the same. So we will, maybe this dilemma is causing ourselves to be better, to become better moral people. The next one is human development. Also at stake. Political parties very much behave like technologists. They discuss technology in terms of loss of jobs, sustainability, congestion, and all of them are very technological. So ask a politician what is his concept of technology, and he will come up with enlightenment sort of statement. Technology should enable mankind to develop himself. Something like that. Something like that. But the reality is that in a new digital world, mankind will enjoy all these nice little gadgeted features, but there will also be walking profiles and quantified and datafied elements under surveillance of control by unknown parties. So preventing a digital divide is a big design issue, and it's not a divide between people who have tools and they don't, because everybody will have digital tools, but people who can make a living out of them, and people who are just using them and be exploited by other parties. And then the third one is humanity. Humanity is at stake too. Datafying will result in certain organizations knowing or assuming to know your preferences. and as well as your behavior and whatever you consume. And at some point you don't need to be asked anything any longer, because you will have become transparent and you know what this movie is about. So the problem is, people will end up in Guantanamo Bay because of this. Systems found out what your intentions are, so we're going to lock you up. And in my country, the Netherlands, we have a digital antichrist, a writer and philosopher, Hans Schnitzler, and he maintains that the lower threshold below humans cease to exist to be human is the line below which humans are no longer capable of accessing their own emotions and thoughts. So, if technology can unlock this resource before we can ourselves, we lose the key to our own minds. So there's the third big design issue is that big design has an obligation to ensure the integrity of the human mind. A big issue in the design of the Internet of Things and other data-finding systems. And hopefully that leads to a more constructive role than just being a cerebral border patrol organization. So, I think I made it in time. And I feel I morphed a little bit too much into the Klaus Schwab sort of doom prophet myself. So let me remedy this by delivering the final closing benediction in a more inspiring Obama ending. Fellow designers, let's dedicate our efforts to inject ethical and moral dimensions into our technology in order to meet the challenges of tomorrow's needs while saving humanity and enriching it at the same time. Therefore, I want you to support the Big Design Manifesto and like us on Facebook. Thank you very much.